Okay, so we'll start with the public meeting. First item is appointment of officers.
Okay, so I move to appoint Ashley as chair.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
All right.
All right, I'm up.
Keep doing what you're doing.
I would move to support Ian as vice chair.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
You guys are like the fastest appointing board for all. Everyone else like
That had
haggles
my
over, and
head
everyone's
spinning
like,
too. It's like,
The haggling comes later for the other.
we'll continue. Terry is taking minutes when she's available. So
Okay.
no secretary needed for this one. The position that no one ever wants. Anyways.
You're
So
lucky. And then we have public comment for items not being heard tonight. No public comment. Okay, then we have a couple of continuances in our notices of intent. Mary D. Starr, 19 East Creek Road is continued to July 31st. Gregory Reyes, 19 East Creek Road is continued to July 31st. Laz Family Nominee Trust is continued until July 31st. And then we have two continuances in the Certificate of Compliance for Cambridge under 10 Medui Creek. And that's to July 31st. So we'll begin with the town of Nantucket, Jetties Beach Playground.
it's going to be requesting a continuance until the 17th.
Okay. So that is continued until July 17th, and we will move on to Richard E. Berman, trustee, 272 Pulpus Road.
Good afternoon to the new commission. Thanks. You'll regret it.
a heck of a way to read.
I know. I've been chairman for my commission for 10 years.
We're going to extend it with hair.
I don't wear a tie to read.
And you still have some hair left.
This is a septic repair at, it's the Rose Covered Cottage on Pulpus Road, 272. There was a system that was put in, it just failed inspection because of separation of the water table. It wasn't quite put in correctly 20 years ago. And what it is a conventional system with just a tank going to a leach field. It's within, the site is a postage stamp. There's bordering vegetated wetland all the way around it. On the other side of the road, there's a very small area that it can fit in. We're putting it back in the same area of the existing leach field. There's a well that's right here. The site is very difficult. In the past, they've tried to get other sites for wells, and there's no good wells sites out there. They keep coming, they don't get good water. It's a lot of clay and iron. So they have tried in the past to get another well location. They are going into the Board of Health for a variance or a waiver for the setback from the well to the leach field. There will be a testing requirement for that. The leach field, this septic system will be upgraded to a Septitech processing system, and then it's going to go into a drip system as a leach field. It's small tubes, and it lets them go in without doing as much grading. They're right up against the road. They're asking for a variance from the Title V for the setback to the property line, and they're trying not to create a mound in there. If you remember, it's going to be right underneath the fence. There's a split, a picket fence right along the road, and so it's really shoehorned in. But we're increasing the efficiency in terms of nutrients with the Septitech and also with the drip irrigation system, and try to minimize minimize everything, grading and everything. We're probably just 60 feet from the edge of the wetland. It does meet Title V. It doesn't meet your local, and it doesn't meet your bylaw. We have asked for a waiver for that. We feel like we don't have another location on the site that we can fit it and juggle everything in. So we are asking for that waiver for the setback to to the 100-foot setback from the wetland boundary.
Questions from the commission?
None.
Dave, have you worked with any wells in that area?
Yeah, I pulled 2 wells that weren't working.
I mean, there's always been talk about trying to move it over. They're over farther this way or down this way, and then every time they've done it, they've hit nothing but clay and
Lots of clay.
a lot of clay.
Any questions from the public? Jeff, do you have everything we need to close?
We do.
Okay. Can I get a motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That carries unanimously.
And welcome to the new commission. You'll be sorry too,
Thank you.
but you're in with a good group.
Uplifting thoughts. All right, we're moving on to Grant L. and Margaret C. Cambridge at 10 Medui Creek Road.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, members of the commission. I want to welcome the 2 new commissioners. My name is Kevin Dale. I'm an attorney. I represent Grant and Margaret Cambridge, the former owners of property at 10 Medui Creek Road. Mr. and Mrs. Cambridge sold the property about 2 weeks ago. But by way of background, in preparing for the closing, we discovered that there were 2 outstanding orders of conditions, 1810 and 2307, and I applied to the commission for certificates of compliance for each order so we could clear the title for the closing. And when the site inspection took place, it was determined that there were a couple of structural components that weren't approved by the prior orders of condition and also were located in buffer zones. Specifically, portions of the retaining wall and cobbled parking area. So the background is that Cambridge's bought the property in 2003, and they applied for an order of conditions to build a house and various improvements. They didn't complete the construction of everything, and the order of conditions 1810 ran out. They reapplied for a new order in 2010 and completed the construction of their house and the improvements under that order, and everything was finished in 2014. So everything that's there now was there in 2014. The specific issues involved are that portion of the retaining wall, and if you look at the notice of intent, towards the end of the notice of intent, you'll see photographs of these structures. A portion of the retaining wall is located in the 50-foot buffer zone. So is a small portion of the cobbled parking area. And a very small portion of the retaining wall is in the 25-foot buffer zone. In addition to that, the pool fence meanders by 1 to 2 feet into a portion of the 50-foot buffer zone, and other improvements have minimal intrusion. What the Cambridges are asking the commission to do is to regularize and approve everything where it is, because the disturbance or relocating or removing these structures right now would be much more adverse to the wetland resource areas than leaving them where they are. And they also propose to mitigate by putting wetlands plantings in the portion of the 25-foot buffer zone where the retaining wall is. It now has lawn area. Now, in some ways, I'm outside my realm of expertise here, because I usually rely on my colleague, Brian Madden, who did the site plan. He's a wetlands expert from LEC Consultants. I think the commission knows him well. I expect this hearing to be continued, and he'll be here the next time. But I wanted to give you an overview of what the Cambridges are asking the commission to do, see if I can answer any of your questions, and see if in your good graces you'll continue the matter until July 31 so we can supplement the application, have Brian here, perhaps provide you with a mitigation planning plan. We already have an estimate for the plannings, and I don't want to be presumptuous, do whatever else the commission wants us to do. So, if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer.
I assume the closing is in abeyance until this matter is settled.
Closing has occurred.
Oh,
Everything is done. There's an escrow that's set up to address these matters, and that's where it is.
okay, thanks.
Is it possible when you provide a planting plan, like there were some trees that were on the 25 side of the retaining wall, to identify what those
Yes.
species are, if they're native, non-native,
Mm-hmm.
and just more details there?
Trees in the 25 buffer.
Yeah, it looked like right above the retaining wall and then below it in one of the photos, like what those tree species are.
Mm-hmm. By the way, I did a little sketch plan, and again, not my expertise, that shows the 25 and 50-foot buffer zones, lines, and the red is the retaining wall. So, you see Mr. Topham, he appreciates my plan expertise.
Very proud of you.
Any other thoughts from the commission?
No, I'd like to see the planning plan.
Plan.
And,
Let me just say, is there anything else you'd like us to provide at the continued hearing, other than what you have? If you don't know now, let me know,
I mean-
so that we'll have time.
For me, just a detailed planting plan,
Okay.
where shrubs might go, what's gonna transition, yeah.
Yeah, I sort of feel that, again, we're being presented with fait accompli, so I would like to see the mitigation to be fairly extensive. It seems to me that that would be fair enough, you know.
We would have what I would call a very healthy estimate from the landscaper for mitigation. But we'll show all of that on the plan.
Any questions from the public? Okay, you said you'd like to continue?
I'd like to continue to the 31st of July if the commission so desires to do it, ask you to do it.
Is there a motion to accept the continuance?
So moved.
second.
Second. All in
And I
favor?
would add that the orders of condition, I mean, the certificates of compliance for the prior orders are on also for that day, and we may have to continue that.
Yep.
In terms of timing, just.
Thank you. Okay, so we're moving on to A and B Realty Trust, 14 and 20 Shakamo Road. Do we not have a file number for this one?
No, we do not yet.
I can. I reckon.
For the applicant, Art Gasparo with Nantucket Engineering. Welcome to the new commissioners as well. I'm before you tonight with the notice of intent, which, as the chair mentioned, a file number hasn't been issued, so we will be requesting a continuance. I'd like to briefly go over the project and then find out if there's additional information that you may want or any questions, and then we'll continue, so I don't want to take too much of your time. The project before you is primarily for land management activities and establishment of the wetland resource areas. We have very large two abutting parcels out in Shakamo with front on Nantucket Harbor, and the resource areas are, we have varying areas of bordering vegetated wetland, coastal bank, and salt marsh. As well as land subject to coastal storm flowage. The coastal bank comes up on one area which I show the resource area, the most restrictive resource area boundary is denoted by the blue line, and the policy, DEP policy with respect to slopes is what brings the bank up at one section. It is not subject to any erosion or wave action, doesn't contribute sediment. This is a highly vegetated, I wouldn't go so far as to say inland, but there is a fair amount of salt marsh or BVW at the base of the bank, and this is it's thick, heavily. It was a challenging topo, and so the resource areas are shown. Much of the coastal bank is defined by the limit of land subject to coastal storm flowage elevation, which varies on the eastern side of the property at elevation 9, and then the FEMA mapping drops to 7 on the sort of southwestern side. What's being proposed is some mowing and management of invasive species. This owner has bought this property some 20-something years ago and not really done much other than some walk-in trails. It's grown in. The red line that you see on the plan is outside of your jurisdiction, mowing that had been done just over the course of the past couple of months to get it somewhat opened up, and so that we could get in there to actually start doing more surveying activities. And what we'd like to do, the green line on the plan represents the 25-foot buffer zone, and we would not propose any mechanical mowing or brush cutting any closer than 25 feet. And then, so what we're doing is we're avoiding some pretty amazing cedar trees and older growth, and we're not clear cutting the property. Anything really of significant caliper is being maintained, and working around to clear the understory and underbrush that's grown up, like say over the last couple of decades. And then from the 25-foot buffer zone and into the resource areas, there is an awfully lot of bush honeysuckle. That is the primary target plant of concern. Now, what I've done, and this is, I think, part of the discussion to have with the commission, is because of the nature of this project, where there's no structures, there's no other activity other than this owner wants to try to improve the land. I've written the application as a blanket in terms of invasive species. So we haven't, now I haven't seen any. I've been out there extensively. I haven't seen any knotweed out there. The bush, but again, I've worked this with Brian Madden as well. But we didn't get into really identifying every potential invasive species. But the idea would be to get a permit that then, working with professionals to remove the invasive species. If we encountered others, we would have a permit that would allow that removal. There are, I think, some varying stands in the salt marsh of Phragmite, but some of it, I believe, may also be common reed, and so I think that we need to do a little more investigation there. So while I wrote up the application to include work in the salt marsh, that's one of the things I'd like to come back to you, as well as have a discussion with DEP. If we stick with the and the owner, really, how much he wants to get involved with trying to get into that differentiation, and as well as control when the real primary aspect of the project was the bush honeysuckle and the upland and the meadows. And so I felt that I should, if we're getting a permit for land management, and he's willing to put the resources in, we should go all encompassing. So I just kind of wanted to bring that to your attention as something that I just heard from DEP just 2 days ago about that aspect of the ecological restoration, which is similar to the filing I did a couple of months ago out on Loretta Lane, which Seth was doing the salt marsh. So it's a little bit more involved of an NOI, which we can do if that aspect of the work is going to continue. So I would ask that be held forward, and I can get you more information if it's going to be done, or if we're going to remove that from the project. And then the other aspect of the proposal is to create some meadows in the areas once they're brush cut. And likewise, we haven't identified exactly where a meadow would be planted, but what we've done is just because it's sort of going to be dependent on shade and the trees of what's left from the understory, but that we would only use native species. We're not proposing wells or irrigation, so it's got to be, you know, drought tolerant. We're not trying to come in here and put in any kind of ornamentals or it's just, he doesn't want to see, the owner that is, just all of the same stuff just come back. He would rather see it as sort of a grassland, you know, meadow type. And so I've written the application to allow the creation of meadows upland of the 25. So again, there would be nothing planted in from 25 down, would only be hand removal of bush honeysuckle, which is fairly easily, you know, uprooted and removed, and that would be the, you know, what would be proposed there. So with that, and knowing that, again, we're also waiting for natural heritage. The natural heritage boundary is the other green line with the dash and the long and short dashes. So it's really just down in this area. The other side of the property isn't subject to their review. They've been sent the entire application.
I have a few questions.
Yes.
I'd like to see, first of all, a planting plan for those meadows that you put in there, especially with grasslands. If there's a huge area of bush honeysuckle and it isn't planted right, there's a possibility of the honeysuckle invading those areas as well. Like to see a little bit more about, after the honeysuckle is removed, more specifics about how you're going to monitor any potential regrowth in that area. And just one comment, Phragmites and common reed are the same plant. So if you have either of those, it's the same thing.
Unless you're thinking there might be native.
That was right. We've had that come up before, and that was where Brian looked, you know, we looked quick and said we weren't quite sure whether it might be, which I know has been a part of the conversation that's happened in the past at the commission level. So I appreciate that, and I'm not a plant expert as the engineer, so that, you know, so that's why I have to say, well, we'll have to. Sure.
Yeah, there is some knowledge that there might be a native haplotype of Phragmites here on Nantucket. Where it is, we know it is specifically here.
Somehow
it needs to be. You need somebody who's a plant scientist to help you really delineate if that's a native haplotype or not.
So, recognized.
If I may, Madam Chairman?
Yep.
My understanding is that there's a native grove is perhaps the wrong term, on the other side of the Porpoise Road from Sacajah Pond, right? Mm-hmm. And Ernie, we were talking about that?
Yeah, I sent that off and had it checked, yeah.
You did? And that's significantly smaller than the invasive Phragmites in terms of height and amongst one of the characteristics, right?
There's a bunch of things, and
yeah.
Sarah, was it Blasi? Is that Big Jen's name?
Yeah, Sarah Blasi from Cornell. He did a lot of the basic work on it, but yeah. Morphologically, yeah, it's like generally smaller and not as robust.
And if you pull the leaves off, they come off different. And
I have a feeling we may end up removing that portion of the project given the complications and the salt marsh.
Yeah, I just know even in the scientific community, there's been some discussion back and forth about that specific, trying to delineate Phragmites. It's a really complex species, or even maybe a species complex, and there are alternative views even within the scientific community about what's what in terms of its nativeness. So I would get a specialist to help you out in that area.
It would be interesting to know if it's native.
If it's a native, yeah.
Well, it might have been introduced 100 years ago. I mean, how the hell would you know? Excuse me.
Size, and like you said, I think there was a feeling that it might be, so that was why.
Right.
But anyway, we are going to research it, and I appreciate the input. It's
yeah,
certainly
sure.
helpful.
Do you have Brian looking at it? Is that Yes, yeah, I would think if Brian's suspicious, that's a pretty good call to get it looked at.
Yeah, if he probably knows what he's looking at.
Yeah.
We didn't really focus on it. We were focusing on the rest of the project and the delineation
Came
that
about
came
that.
up. So I don't certainly want to put any words, into his mouth or that but we'll look at it and get back to you with written information as to how we'll proceed related to the frag.
So, Art, I didn't fully understand if you were planning to actually cut down by hand all the way to the wetland itself, or are you staying outside the 25-foot
So we would
buffer?
we would mechanically mow with a
Right.
brush cutter to the 25.
Yeah.
From the 25 into to the resource area, and then even within the coastal bank resource area would be hand cutting and removal. Because again, there's a lot of the bush honeysuckle actually on the face of that coastal bank, which is, it seems like, especially through here, it's like a big hill. It's not your typical coastal bank, and it's, it's vegetated with a variety of species, but we would be proposing to, do whatever we can to eradicate the bush honeysuckle in all areas, but not take any machinery past the 25. That would be the limit.
And would you be planning on using, I noticed that you have chemical control all the way to the edge? Or?
So we, what I expected was that there would, if we were to use, again, with the blanket invasive species control, that any chemical treatment would be conditioned through the order to use rodeo if it was within the 25 of the resource area, and with the standard monitoring protocols per best management practices, licensed applicator, volume. I understand, I think we do, and I agree that I'll have to provide and should provide a little more detail as to the monitoring. What I did was to say it would be done. It's kind of already been laid out in the amendment to the regulations with the best management practices. That's fully what we intend to adhere to.
So I've got a question for you. So you'd be willing to leave all trees of a certain size, like when we're talking about junipers and things like that?
Yeah, we could pick I think roughly when we did the initial, I won't say it was a hard rule, but probably anything that was bigger than 6 inches, we left.
Okay.
But for in those resource areas, the idea is to work around
Those.
To those and to remove the understory.
So I think, Jeff, were we saying 4 inches on
is
our
what we-
previous?
For different.
We've gone down. Some of it's been driven by what type of trees
Tree.
it's been.
Okay.
So I think that's a little bit up to the commission for once, what they'd like to do.
I mean, I'd say 4 inches.
And that
Again,
would be
once you-
anywhere would that be all the way to the 100 you'd be thinking? So anywhere in the buffer zone?
I mean, certainly within the 50. I mean,
Okay.
What do you guys think?
Agreed.
Okay.
And it depends on the species. I mean, if they're exotics, I have less concern
Right.
about keeping them. I mean, they can provide good habitat in the, but, and I don't know, we don't seem to have, I mean, the common exotic trees out here are those couple of maples. And they don't, I don't know, I don't seem to see them a lot in natural areas.
I didn't see a lot of maple in there. A lot of cedar, scrub oak.
Well, that's all good stuff.
Bayberry, viburnum, that stuff that doesn't have the larger, more
Yeah, it doesn't
shrub.
get-
But for the, and again, I don't want to start to go too far afield with my expertise. But I mean, the cedars and the oaks are beautiful, and the idea was certainly to
And like big beach plums,
preserve them.
leave them.
Yeah.
Okay. And then my other question, are you just gonna do like a one-time mow to the 25, see what sort of meadow species you have coming up, and then go from there?
No, the idea I think would be to go through ideally into the fall, right? So we realize that this process is, and this isn't the time of year that we could get the permits and do the clearing, and then in the fall would be to do some tilling and seeding for some of the meadow areas. Not just wait to see. I mean, we know it'll just be reemergent growth if we don't do anything besides mow.
Right.
So the idea is that we would mechanically till outside of the 25. Again, not the whole, you know, property, but sort of target some areas. And with the size property that we have, they would be, you know, sizable in terms of, you know, acres. But probably not all just one, right? The idea that I've talked about with the landscape designer out there was that, you know, there would be a few areas that they would target to start, and again, to then till and then seed with native grass.
And I would think, you know, the vegetated wetland or the bordering wetlands, we would want to protect half of the 25 to 50.
Right.
I thought of that, and I think that is accomplished through, we've limited the work to here. So you have all of the rest of the property going over here where we wouldn't be doing any work. So I think that's the balance. The only place, and then I know wasn't very clear, but the only, I can hold it up maybe for everybody. This is the only BBW boundary that's the limiting. The rest of it this area right here is the BBW, and then the rest of it becomes, I mean, while there's BBW, there's coastal bank and land subject to coastal storm flowage, which comes up further.
So which is the area that you're...
Right in here, and then we're not doing any work on all of this portion in terms of mechanical mowing. So that would preserve at least that 50%.
Are these meadows going to be distinct patches? And if so, do you have an estimate of how many and what general size they might be?
So we don't, because the idea is to be adaptive to the land. You'll notice that I stopped the topography in here because, and again, it's really all out of the jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. The other thing I would mention is that, you know, the jurisdiction, all of this is non-jurisdictional. You know, the jurisdictional area is really just, I should probably add the 100. I will add the 100 to the plan for you, but you know, it runs you have the blue at the boundary and then the 25, so you can see the scale that it's really just along in here. So most of the meadows are actually going to be outside of the jurisdiction, but there could be some that, you know, but we don't, you know, again, we want to adapt to the land and where we have such a large size to where you know, the designer thinks they're going to really do best.
You're going to clear first,
in terms of restoration. Yeah.
Is she going to provide a plan, or are you just going to?
We were hoping to get a blanket approval to allow, you know, and then come back, and that can be part of the monitoring protocol and the condition to provide, you know, a surveyed plan. It'd be very easy. It would be doable for me to go back after and you know, locate the edge of the planted area and then add that to the plan, and that could also be a condition and certainly part of the monitoring protocol after the initial work is done. Say, you know, give us, I don't know, what you would think, you know, 60 days or something to come in with a surveyed plan to show the areas that were planted, and then we could do a follow-up maybe this time next year in terms of emergent growth and a report back to you.
Can I hop in for a second?
Yeah.
So I think what we've seen in projects like this similar, I think the one that kind of harkens to it the most is probably some of the work that was done out of Water's Edge, where it was kind of similar, where we had some of the monitoring where they had to provide that plan work back to primarily to Natural Heritage, kind of as they stepped through the process for review and approval as they went. I think that's something that would be this level of kind of land management activity, probably in keeping with the bylaw and regulations, to say, do the first stage, come back, and then we'll kind of authorize. We've already authorized the second stage, but that way we know we're at a transition point in the monitoring program or the planting program for what's going on, and have that kind of interactive process. So I think that's something that, as you guys look to condition, that would probably be something that could be included in a order of conditions for a project like this.
Okay. And then my, I guess, only other concern, just because of the topography, there's no silt fences or anything to mark these boundaries, whoever's doing the mechanical mowing, like, will there be someone on site with them to make sure they're not overstepping?
Yes, and so what we did, we were out there as surveyors for weeks this spring. That's how we first flagged. We actually staked what I believed was going to be 125-foot line to the resource areas, and then the brush cutter came in, and that's where you see the red line that he went to. And we would do the same thing. It's much easier now. We would stake the 25 or perhaps a 30 for a little bit of a factor of safety there. And when I calculate the stake out for these things, when I cut corners for lines, I always, of course, am cutting to the proper side, right? So that we don't end up, with something cut into that area. So, but yes, this client has, absolutely had us out there with the brush cutter, my crew, supervise, and, because again, we're gonna come back with an as-built plan or a monitoring plan that shows the edge of that mowing, and I don't wanna be standing in front of you with that having gone into the area. So that's how we will do it, is we just hang big, so we go through and we hang big pink streamers, and the guy on the machine can see the pink flagging and know that's not where to go past. Sill fence, I don't think we should do. I think there's more disturbance to try to follow a line, and since the only root disturbance or potential for sedimentation of some tilling will only be in limited areas, and you'll still have a completely vegetated 25-foot buffer zone. Certainly if there was a particular area where we thought, the runoff may be, then we would, on our own, or, we would put in any kind of, a small hay bale, a straw wattle. We're not gonna go through this project to then have something, washing out.
Well, then I'm confused, because I thought you were going to cut right to the line by hand between the 25. You were going to proposing that as opposed to leaving the 25-foot buffer intact.
Oh no, the 25-foot
okay.
buffer would be intact except for bush honeysuckle or invasive. So that part of things, and then I think that if we had to disturb a big area of from the root disturbance, they would probably just put down some like winter rye or some kind of just a basic, grassy, just to not leave the soil completely fallow for more invasives to seed. But we wouldn't go in there with the machines from the 25.
Right, no, I understood that.
In terms of removal of, primarily that plant.
Okay. Any other questions?
We will be coming back to you.
Are there any really large honeysuckles? Because I did some at Lost Farm, and there were some that were almost 3 inches in diameter at the base.
And so
And I just wonder about pulling those out if there'd be more.
Those are the ones that may need some herbicide treatment with the cut, remove, and then wipe the stem to get at those bigger ones. So that's why I did that's why I wrote it up to sort of allow for some herbicide use, limited, subject to the conditions and the reporting, but there are some big ones.
Yeah, I just sawed them off. Then all you have to really do is just paint the cambium, the very edge of it. And I used both glyphosate in the fall and Garlon in the spring, and they were both very effective at, no resprouts.
Thanks. That's exactly what we had in mind for the big ones that we can't get out. And then of course, cut and remove the superstructure. Take it, dispose of it off-site.
Any questions from the public? Okay. Seeing not.
Could I request a continuance to the 17th, please?
Okay. So, motion to accept the continuance?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just till next week?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks? Yeah, I think so, on that next meeting.
Okay, so on to amended orders of conditions. 46 Shimmo Pond Road, nominee trust, 46 Shimmo Pond Road.
Yep. Let's go. Take them out.
This is a new
once again for the applicant, Art Gasparo.
A few weeks ago.
I'm before you tonight for a project that has been under construction for the last year or so with permits from the commission. I believe you're all familiar with the site at 46 Shimmo Pond Road. This is a site which is a residential redevelopment project, and there's an existing timber bulkhead, dock, coastal bank, and then this new home that's being constructed. And what's before you tonight is a more of a final landscape plan that's been developed since the initial approval. And we just want to be sure that you know, all features have been reviewed by the commission prior to being constructed. I know there's a lot on here, but you know, the changes that essentially have occurred, the limit of work has stayed the same, so there's no increase in the limit of work. There's been some refinement of the grill terrace, which again is a patio, which they kept outside of the 25-foot buffer zone. I could back up the resource area boundary. The top of the coastal bank is in blue here, and then in blue you have the 25, the 50, and the 100-foot buffer zones. In purple is the footprint of the structure that formerly existed on the property. The walls that are on the plan have been previously approved, and so the grill terrace patio configuration is slightly different. The deck in the front has actually been slightly reduced, and they've given much more detail than you previously had for the ornamental plantings around, which are limited to around the house and outside of the 25-foot buffer zone. And then for the native planting area, which actually will go all the way to the 25, and then this slightly revised grading scheme near the pool. And then the other aspect, which is the reason that I filed it. So these are, if I would categorize these as you know, landscape refinements. The reason that I filed it as which I think perhaps could have been handled as a minor modification. The other aspect of the project, which I covered in a narrative form, but there is a path that is on the plan right here, which goes down to the existing dock. You've issued an order of conditions, and we recently obtained a Chapter 91 license. That was a pre-existing dock, and it's very small, the one that's curved, if you're aware of it, that's out there. And the owner would like to run a subsurface, you know, water and electric line down to the edge of that dock, so that you can have fresh water down there and just rinse off. You know, you can only use a very small boat or anything else just at the rinse feet before they come up off into the grass path. So it would be installed in an existing disturbed area, essentially, you know, with a mini excavator, and then that area would be replanted. But we wanted to be sure. I think you see that on most of the docks and piers. I don't know that they often get permitted, but I thought that you know, that activity, which is outside of the that's the one piece of the project which is actually outside of the approved limit of work, would be the installation, and that would be a seasonal, you know, water line which would be blown out, you know, with air, much like the irrigation system.
They don't want to put lights or anything.
No.
Okay.
I told them that lighting, you know, would be of concern.
What do they need power down there for?
He said, you know, here's a chance you could use it. I asked that question too. You know, whether the only thing he could say possibly would be like a small battery charger, you know, for a small whaler that he might have down, you know, on the dock. But he just feels like right now the site's you know, it's being disturbed, and this would be the time to, you know, put those facilities in.
It's an electric powered boat?
No,
No,
but
just
your
to
regular
charge it.
battery
Just
that
the
turns
battery,
your,
yeah.
if you leave your bilge pump on, or, the two options are kind of to leave a bilge pump on, drains the battery on those small boats, or go bail it every time it rains. So that's, and you're not gonna get a boat on this particular dock, it's very, very shallow. So it's not some big, but you'd like to have, have that, down. It's also there where they're gonna go the family is gonna go to the beach. So they would have, like charge cell phones or whatever else. They would have an outlet basically at the beach.
I mean, I just don't want like radios down there blasting, and I don't know. The electricity makes me a little
You can have
nervous.
that, but battery powered.
Yeah, I mean,
it's just, I see the boating convenience of it, but it's like a beach fridge.
he's just looking for an outlet is really what he wants down at the beach, at the edge of the dock. And so in terms of protected interests, I don't know that.
So certainly just to kind of hop into that, if you guys were willing to approve that, I mean, you could condition that it's the electric to be run not for, not for lighting, something that's kind of within our purview. Can't really condition the use beyond there. If you wanted to plug in a cell phone to charge, or wanted to plug in a battery charger, or wanted to plug in, I don't know, some little mini fridge for the day to keep, instead of bringing the cooler down, he certainly could. We can't really regulate use to that degree. So, but lighting is something that is within our purview as it has a known impact to the resource areas. So you could certainly add that to the order. It wouldn't be a condition to say no lighting down at the dock area.
I think we'd want to add that.
Absolutely.
I think the lighting is important.
Yeah, once the power's down there, it would be easy to slap a light in there, so we need to make sure that they're not gonna.
Any other questions or concerns? Any questions from the public? Okay. So, do I have a motion to accept the amended order?
Do I be close an issue?
Close an issue.
Close an issue?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
But hold on, before you make the vote, close an issue with the condition in regards to the lights. So
Yes.
close an issue
Close an issue
as conditioned.
as conditioned with no lights allowed.
Okay.
All right.
Second.
Second, John.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
And we're moving into.
Wait, 1 second. So as you will come around, not all of them have people's names on it. Just sign on your appropriate blank. And since this is the first signing for Maureen and Seth, if you ever vote in opposition, you still have to sign it, but you are welcome to write opposed or against or whatever you would like on your blank, just as long as you sign it.
Through gritted teeth.
All right, so moving into the public meeting, request for determination, Nantucket Pond Coalition, Long Pond, White Goose Cove, and Massasoit Bridge.
I need to recuse.
Oh my God, yeah.
Holiday.
Same to you.
Hello, nice to see you.
Welcome back to
Nice to see you.
both commissioners, of which we have one here. The existing commissioners will recall that we had a permit to do White Goose Cove Phragmite mitigation 5 years ago. We're now in our 4th year. We had a 3-year contract, which we've extended to 5 years, which includes 2020, but we're pretty much done there. Subsequently, we received permits to do some mitigation on both hummock and mycomic, and the orders of condition for those permits included the idea of reseeding after 2.5 years if there wasn't adequate reseeding. In the case of White Goose Cove, which had 12-foot high plants, the root balls have been there for 50 years, we think, 40 or 50 years, and there is some regrowth, which Sarah, who's with me today, Sarah Boyce, has served as our botanist for the last couple of years. But I just thought it might be a good idea to think about doing some reseeding there. So we asked her for some recommendations, which she will address. You have in front of you a list that put together at the time of the submission. Subsequent to presenting that list in continued conversations with the Earth Seed Company in Pennsylvania, I came to learn there's a variety of wetland blends for either dry land, moist land, or standing water, which are less expensive and I think possibly more appropriate for what we're trying to do. But with that, I just wanted to see how the commission felt about it and whether we could get, with Sarah's direction and guidance, a permit to do the reseeding. Sarah, do you want to add anything to that?
No, other than when I first made the species list, and we were initially thinking of doing seeding in the early, or as late as we could in the spring, but obviously we're here today, so I'm thinking timeline-wise, it might make sense to do more fall seeding, and so a little bit of it is the flexibility of what the water levels will be at the time of seeding. I know that you were just out there and it was pretty high. If we're there at a different time, there's more soil is exposed. So we are cognizant of the fluctuations in the water levels, and we'll keep that in mind. I think everything else is in the proposal for kind of things that we're keeping in mind, and really it's spot seeding, so areas where there hasn't been regrowth of or coming in of the vegetation. So.
I thought it'd be good to get an experience with it and see what happens.
And thanks for volunteering to come in and take care of this, because it was submitted the first go around. And
yeah, I just didn't think of it. This is, I know you have a list, but there's a series of grasses like these. Okay, there's flowers, swamp rose and blue iris, swamp thrush, coastal joe, ivy, boneset. Excuse me.
And the table that's in the proposal were the species were native based on what's around at Long Pond and other areas as well. So.
This is the way some of it looks now, where this species has come in on its own, sort of a monoculture. And there are other areas like this, which in fact, I think could bear some reseeding.
Do you have an estimate of like the square area you think you'd be reseeding, or is it just you'll walk the edge and?
You've already walked the edge.
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. I really don't. We did 4 acres of frags. I think it's less than an acre because, you know, the pond is high now, and so it's really up to the scrub oak, right?
Yeah.
You're
Yep.
out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, whenever Sarah says we ought to plan them, we just have to see what the shorelines are going to be like. But my guess is, out of the 4 acres, it's about an acre.
I think I overestimated in what I wrote based on kind of the late winter kind of pictures of it. But with the water so high now, I think we've lost some of the shoreline where Phragmites had been. And but so I agree with you that it's probably less, but it will be more, as again, spot treatment based on, so that's why I said hand broadcast instead of using any kind of, you know, even small broadcast spreader, because it's going to be more spotty. And even where, I think which one, one of these photos that you showed, Bob, these are all the Baccharis hominifolia, the high tide bush, and so it's native, it's all coming in, and it's a monoculture now, but I think we would be more spreading additional seeds among that, but I think it's more of a spot treatment.
Yeah.
I'd just be interested, I guess, in trying to monitor how much area you're covering with seed to actually have data on how that's working.
We
ultimately.
could take.
I could do a Google Earth probably with Ken. But I think we're going to end up with about an acre, but I'd be happy to do that.
Because you can even probably, as you're seeding, use your phone to
Yeah, I think
map
you
those
could,
points.
if you have like a handheld GPS, you could probably, just the areas where you started seeding and stopped, just
That's kind of
take 2 points and then
That's a
kind
good
of
idea.
connect the dots and
Yeah.
have a rough estimate for depth of seeding. So if
And
you
I
need,
was going to do some, I propose to do some photo points too, just to take record of, maybe not if we're spot treating, you know, I can't imagine how big each spot would be, but if we're doing like in connection with like GPSing, like seeding here and stopped here, taking a picture or a few just of the general area so that you can determine success in kind of a quick and dirty way.
Yeah, that would
So-
be great.
Bob, refresh my memory, right? When we first started this project, you were doing some analyses of marine life didn't want. And how did that work out in the end?
There was no
No
Yeah.
impact.
Yeah. Doug Horst, I think, was helpful in that. And we
Yeah.
did huge samples of soil samples, water
Yeah,
samples,
yeah.
all kinds of stuff.
So I'll actually hop in. This is not a plug for the project, but the town happened to do, for water quality purposes, we did a redo of invertebrate sampling within the pond in 2017
Yeah.
to compare it to the original Mass Estuaries Project invertebrate sampling that we had done, because we've managed to get kind of, Long Pond doesn't have an established TMDL because it's part of the Nantucket Harbor regime. If it did, we would be below the threshold for that project, so we thought it would be good, as we had 3 years of solid water quality, to relook at the invertebrates. So when we evaluate invertebrates, we just kind of look at species diversity and species richness, and just kind of what species we have in general. And Long Pond's actually shown a increase in all of those areas, and the species that we're seeing are actually more indicative of a system that's restoring to good health. They're not some of the more nasty, like low oxygen creatures that run around. So
Great.
I think that's encouraging. I mean, that's also from the kind of the mid-water part of the pond and not right directly on the shore. But in the water column itself and in the sediments there, we're showing signs that the pond is actually improving in health.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah.
No,
You know, we've heard from residents on both ponds, once you have a shoreline back, you know, these frags were out 30 feet, 40 feet, where, you know, the turtles can get out and herons can fish, and you know what I mean? It brings the pond back to really its original configuration. So we're very lucky with Hummock. We're at about 80% mitigation on year one. I mean, we just nailed 6 acres in 1 year. I think on White Goose Cove, we had a huge storm 2 weeks before we did the work, and some of the plants were in senescence. In year 2, we had almost 60% regrowth. I was very discouraged at that because I thought, yeah, this might not work, but I think it was an unusual case. And the same with my comet, we've had very little regrowth. So we're pretty much done, I think. It's possible the land bank may come back and want to do the northeast part across from the Friends of Long Pond, north of Massasoit Bridge. So both sides are done, otherwise you have seeds, airborne seeds that come across. The only part that would be left would be the Net Conservation Foundation portion of the pond, the only part left. And then I think I'm talking to the land bank, just so you know, about the narrows at Hummock on the Gardner property where they have trails. Because now both the Long Pond trails and the Gardner trails, you can't see the water, you can't get the, I mean, you're not on the pond. You're just, I mean, you're
Yeah.
4 feet from the pond, but you're nowhere near it. So we have quotes from Solitude, and we'll be back possibly this summer to do something to continue. Because then at that point, all 3 ponds will be done except for Conservation Foundation property.
So as a resident of that area, although not this particular project, it's really been terrific to see this shoreline return, as you say, because it's really been a barrier as opposed to any kind of opening to the pond for kayaking or anything else. And this is really, it's been done carefully, and I think the Nantucket neighborhood is extremely happy with the results so far. And reseeding, I think, is, you know, because this is, I mean, the shoreline right now, some of it, it's not so attractive. So I think doing the reseeding, and obviously you all are learning as you're going along too. Yeah, exactly. So I just, you know, this was something I was very pleased to see from a purely Nantucket resident point of view.
And Nantucket Residents Association has agreed with us that when our contract is up in 5 years, that they will co-fund with us years 6 through 10 to continue to monitor, because I think it'll take a decade, frankly, all in. Although you may just do a half a day of red gloving, you know what I mean? Kind of a frond here and a frond there in the hybrid areas. But I don't think this is something you can turn your back on without really finishing the job. And the reseeding, I'm very curious about. I'm curious to see what happens.
So we'll just expect an annual, I suppose, annual report, and
So they've proposed doing that as part of the program itself. So since they've included that in their application materials, and this is a RDA, so it's a little bit different, but since they've included it, that would essentially be part of the project to do. So,
Yeah. Solitude will report heavily on the mitigation, and Sarah and I are talking about her reporting on the botany side of this. Like, we put stakes out before and after. She'll come out this fall and we'll look again, and then when we do the reseeding, we'll look again, and you all can see over years what happens with this.
so I'll let in quickly too. They're still obligated under the original order of conditions to do the monitoring as part of that project as well. So they overlap somewhat. So they, just because they're filing a new application to change the work essentially to add this in, they're still required to meet those requirements as well. So there's monitoring and reporting in with that too.
Oh, and just something I happened to notice today, driving over Massasoit Bridge, the cattails are coming back, which is so exciting to see. And I know the red-winged blackbirds are going to be very happy with those. So it's
They're very nice.
just haven't seen a cattail there in 30.
Right soils might over time be helpful long-term to bring ponds back.
So have the cattails been dormant that long?
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Frags just blow them out.
They've been in
right.
pockets too, so I think removing the frag allowed some of the population to expand. So I know at Long Pond, Maureen, by your house, and from there's some areas where there's a big chunk of the cattail, and then it's been able to expand a bit, which is why we didn't include it. Originally, I was thinking we should think about trying to incorporate some of the cattails, but then it's already coming in so much. We were looking for more diversity.
Jennifer Carberg recommended we have them.
Yeah, Jen was like, they're already coming in. So.
She said, look, we already got those. So
If cattails get free, they do a pretty good job of finding their space.
Yeah.
Both those species produce extremely high numbers of wind-blown seeds.
Yeah.
Well, we're hoping to get the Conservation Foundation with its new management in the radar. They have a lot on their plate, and they do a great job on the island, and this is something I'm sure they're not unaware of. And perhaps with Jennifer's help with the seeding, we'll get a little conversation going.
I think this was the big question that at least I've always had is what's the long-term, prognosis here, and it sounds like you're certainly going in the right direction, so that's really good to hear.
Well, if I had Sanford Farm, I'd want to get the pond from there myself, and I think we could do that in a day. We could go over Sanford Farm in a day. It's a free country, and everybody has their own opinion. It's important that you respect that. They do all it right. So, but we're very happy with what's happened, and the residents, I think, are very pleased. And so far, so good.
Jeff, is there a recommendation from staff?
Yes, I would say that you could issue this as a -2 and -3 for allowing for work within the resource area and buffer zone without a notice of intent.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That carries with Seth recused.
So we're good to go?
You're good
Yes,
to
you
go.
are.
Good to go.
Great, we're almost done.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
really.
Well, thank you for all the work.
I hate to do it.
Good job.
Did you guys, hey Bob, did you guys include the printed off? I don't want to steal your plant examples. I don't need those. But the photos of Long Pond themselves, can I keep those?
Yeah, you certainly may.
Sorry. We just used them as part of the hearing, so I need to keep
Yeah,
them for
yeah,
part of the
absolutely.
record. The general information, pictures of just the plants, we'll let you keep.
Okay.
You can use those.
Yes. Okay, so we're moving on to
Thank you all.
Amanda P. Olin.
Thank you.
Thank you. Amanda P. Olin, 52 Meadowview Drive.
I haven't even unfolded them yet. Oh, it's so shiny. You gotta sign it. Put the.
Oh,
No,
he can
I-
still sign it because he's.
Even first, I thought you were supposed to sign it, sorry.
Only if you participate in the vote do you have to sign.
My name is Jeff Blackwell. Welcome to the new board members, commission members.
This application is a request for determination of applicability to confirm a wetland boundary and to also allow for an abandonment of an existing septic system and connection to the new town sewer system in Meadowview Drive, which has started accepting applications toward the end of April this year. The process to abandon the septic system is to pump out the old septic tank, which is located in the driveway on the far side of the house from the wetland, and to crush the tank and fill it with sand. Then a new gravity line will be extended from the sewer stubs that were left from the sewer main and connected to the house, the existing house. So the work will take place well away from the wetland, well beyond the 50-foot setback to the wetland. If you have any questions, answer those.
Sounds like a good move.
There's going to be a lot of these happening in the Meadowview Drive area and the Shimo area, which is exactly the idea, is to reduce nitrates in the harbor.
Jeff, do you have a recommendation for this
Yes,
one?
I would recommend the issuance of this as a -3, allowing for work in the buffer zone without requiring notice of intent.
I have a motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Moving into minor modifications. Lydia Denny Realty Trust, 123 Walnut Road.
Alright. Sorry, I told Don I could take care of this. It's amazing what happens to meetings the day before holiday. But it was straightforward enough when I told them how to handle the form. So Lydia Denny Realty Trust, 123 Walnut Road. This was originally a permit for the installation of a tight tank and the abandonment of an existing septic system, and then also a small addition on the house. They're modifying the plan to remove the addition from the house, and they also are raising the elevation of the tight tank from what was supposed to be elevation 8 to elevation 9, to help with any concerns with flooding and to meet some of the Board of Health standards. So that is the minor modification request.
Okay.
Any questions? Motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That carries unanimous. August Point LLC, 8 Willard Street.
Jeff Blackwell for the applicant, August Point LLC. An order of condition was issued by the commission about a year and a half ago for the construction of a dwelling and a shed with associated landscaping. When we measured the completed project a couple of weeks ago, I realized that a deck which had originally been permitted along the south side of the house, which is shown in red on this plan, had been, a deck and stairs, had been converted into a deck with a pergola over over the top. The resource area here is land subject to coastal storm flowage, so this request for a minor modification is, I think, one that merits approval. There is the foundation system for the deck is piers, so there's no interruption or displacement of floodwaters in the resource area, and it's just this function and scope of the previously approved feature on the house is slightly different, slightly bigger, but the performance standard is satisfied by no effect on the wetland or the flood zone. So later in the meeting, I'll be also on the agenda is a request for a certificate of compliance. So this is kind of housekeeping before we can get to a request for a certificate of compliance.
Questions? Motion, is there a motion to approve the minor mod?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay, so on to certificates of compliance, Town of Nantucket, Hummock Pond Road, Milk Street to Cisco Beach.
I did have an update. The DPW has scheduled that work to fix those drainage gullies, but with the 4th of July impending, it's not on the top of their to-do list. So I think we'll be back on the 17th to hopefully finish that off.
Okay, so it's continuing.
Yep. I just want to let you know that the work has been scheduled for that to take care of it.
Well, that's positive. Okay, on to Van Vorst, 8 Old Quidnet Milk Route.
All right, so this was a certificate of compliance for a septic upgrade to an IA system. We had been holding this one open for receipt of the certificate of compliance from the Board of Health. We've received that from the Board of Health, so I think we feel comfortable that that certificate can be issued.
Issue the certificate.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Carries unanimously.
Sticky fingers.
And then we're moving on to August Point LLC, 8 Willard Street.
So it's the project that you just saw from Jeff. I think we feel that with the minor modification having gone through that it's in compliance. I think we were probably pretty close to calling it substantially compliant before, just for the pergola being over a permitted deck. But appreciate the housekeeping, so I don't think we have any issues with this one from our end.
Move to issue the certificate.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That carries unanimously.
There you go.
And we're moving on to 115 Washington Street Extension LLC, 115 Washington Street.
I'll let you talk about this one, Jeff, because you're already standing.
Okay. This is a request for a certificate of compliance for a order of conditions that was issued in 2017. The site had previously been developed with a series of small residential structures, and the permit was to, the permit that was issued, was to construct 4 dwelling structures on the property with a driveway and associated landscaping. Throughout the project, there were 2 minor modifications granted by the commission to kind of tweak the landscape elements, and the project has been completed now in conformance with the permit as modified on those 2 occasions. So it's you've probably gotten a glimpse of these structures as you drive by the corner on Union Street, because these first 3, or the westerly structures, are partially in a velocity flood zone, and they are the construction requirements pushed them way up in the air. The bottom of the floor framing on the first floor had to be 2 feet above the flood zone in order to comply with the building code and the FEMA requirements, so.
Yeah, they're all in helix, aren't they?
Yes, yes, and they're really up there in the air, so. I imagine they have quite a view, but I don't need the property up on the houses.
So we did our site inspection, and they appear to be constructed in compliance, and we even poked around to make sure there weren't any sneaky discharges or anything anywhere. And they're really nice because you can actually get underneath the structures. They have little doors in the, I would call it lattice work, but it's only kind of horizontal slats. To get underneath, and weren't able to find anything weird underneath there, or any pump pits or anything like that. So I think we feel like the site, as it sits, is in compliance. But we did look, because one of the neighbors was one of those, we had issues with discharges. So we looked around and looked and looked and looked and looked, and couldn't find anything. The painters thought we were being really weird, because we're just in all the basements and looking around. I guess not even basements, but the piling spaces. But I could almost stand up underneath them without trouble. Not that I'm that tall, but it's crazy.
Jeff could. You could.
I might.
A couple of them you might be able to get under, but Joanne and I are both not that tall. So we recommend they can be issued.
Is there a motion?
Move to issue.
For a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Carries unanimously. And then we're moving on to orders of conditions.
All right, so if everyone looks in their little pile that we gave them with their agenda, beneath it there should be the draft orders. We had a draft for the amended order, but we'll add that condition. So the second set of pages will have the order drafted for 272 Poultice Road.
So we're starting at 272 Pulpus.
The only one we got.
Only have one. Yeah.
So this was the one we closed out earlier this evening for the septic upgrade at 272 Pulpus Road. Sorry, my computer is running slowly. I think the only condition I had was that they had to file all of their applicable reports required for the Board of Health with us as well. Kind of standard practice with us there. Other than that, open to suggestions. Or none if people are happy with that.
I move to approve as drafted.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That carries unanimously.
That's it. It's a short list of orders.
There you go. That's the
John,
shortest.
actually, keep it short.
One.
I wish I had control over that.
What?
Have one.
Okay.
The list will get
things
longer.
today.
Don't you
Tonight
worry.
for
It
you.
gets longer in the winter, for sure.
Took it easy on you.
Yeah, oh yeah, well,
I-
I've been at a couple
we've
of
still got other
hearings that have
things.
gone on
Yeah.
a little longer,
We've got to fight it out for some boards.
like 9 o'clock
Um,
once at
Okay,
least.
so moving on to other business, approval of minutes. Anybody see anything
Good.
in the minutes?
I didn't see
Yep.
anything.
So we'll
Thank you, Terry.
approve by unanimous consent,
Yep.
Yes.
okay? And that's approved. Jeff, any monitoring reports?
We don't have any in at the moment. We're not really in monitoring report season too much, so nothing too crazy.
What about enforcement
So
actions?
enforcement's the one I wanted to update. We've been kind of working on the mitigation sand on the Sconset Bluff. I have been in touch with Dave from Netco, who've been doing the work, and then he went to the hospital. So I'm reconnecting with their site foreman Douglas to get out there and assess that and get their information, and then determine whether or not it needs to be removed. They are well aware that that is probably the likelihood of what's going to happen, depending upon the information that they generate. So that's kind of where we're making progress. Medical thing happened, and then we had to kind of switch human beings. So we're hoping to have that all resolved and that taken care of by the 10th of July as well.
Do you mean the removal as well?
No,
Or
the removal
no?
will be scheduled through there, but to have the determination in place of whether or not it will need to be removed or what areas need to be removed by the 10th. So that's kind of our deadline date for that.
Okay, so our next meeting will have information.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and at the last meeting, you had instructed if they didn't place compliant material, that it was to leave the beach and find somewhere else to go that's outside of our jurisdiction. So
Thanks for
that's
the
kind of where we are. Yeah, so that was helpful. So I apologize for the delay, but sometimes unforeseen things happen. But we're trying to get through it. But we were able to at least track it to where it is, and it is to the south side of the delivery point, and then some still at the delivery point. So none of it went north.
Was there any discussion about what happened with this specific delivery, and have they resumed back to the compliant provider? Or?
So they have kind of stopped at the moment to figure out what they're going to be doing. So
Do you mean, is it, is the cause of it still unclear about what the sourcing of it, or?
So we're getting the source checked, because the source that they had used had previously been providing compliant material. I think they got into a new section that was non-compliant material, and that will have to get retested to be compliant again. So one of the other problems that we're dealing with this site in general too is we're kind of relying upon some DEP policy guidance for placement of nourishment material to always be beach compliant sand, because the order of conditions that they're working under kind of predates when the commission was more savvy to those requirements than they were. I mean, they're still working on the sand-filled tubes that Mr. Weimar and some of his other neighbors permitted well over a decade ago, and the orders of conditions are not quite as robust and thorough as what we currently issue for dealing with mitigation material. So we fall back to just regular DEP policy guidance to have compatible material, and it's not an excuse for them, and they understand that. They understand why the material will more than likely be leaving unless they can demonstrate that it is compliant to that policy. But it's one that if they wrote orders then like we write now, we wouldn't probably even be going through that level of process to do. So sometimes you're chasing ghosts a little bit with older orders. But we're smarter now, smarter commission. So we have learned a lot from lessons of the past. But I mean, I think Ernie was probably on the board when some of these discussions were getting had for some of these, and beach compatible sand was kind of a new phrase that was just kind of coming into these discussions. I mean, in the early 2000s, you never really talked about it, and it just kind of was. So it's not as specific as we issue out. Like the ones we do for the Wilkinson projects now are very specific to what material and what testing requirements are needed to do it, that you need to do it for every sand source or any significant change. Older orders just kind of call for, we need beach compatible sand, and there's no specification on what that is or what's going on. So that's a little bit of the hassle to make sure that it.
Just as a kind of a point of information, so when we have these older orders which don't provide the specificity that we would do now, and so we have to fall back on the DEP guidelines. Is there a way to go back and, if you will, clean up the older orders? To make it clearer. I just don't know what the process is.
No, unfortunately, no. Unfortunately, once they're kind of issued, especially now that these orders have they're not even active anymore. They've passed their 3-year life cycle, or even past their extension. So they're really just working through the maintenance phase of it. But this is why, and I know I've said it to everyone else, when things come in for certificates of compliance, it's why it's imperative to have ongoing conditions that specify those things and orders go forward, because without those, you aren't obligated to meet those conditions
there's
in
no
the
teeth,
future,
right?
Yeah. Well, there's no teeth, but if you challenge that condition and it wasn't carried forward, the Massachusetts courts have actually upheld that once a certificate is issued, if you don't carry it forward, you're no longer obligated to follow that specific condition. So if your condition was beach compatible sand and you got a certificate of compliance and no one put that as an ongoing condition and you put something that's not compatible down, you're really in a bind. So then you're trying to enforce on a policy decision and not a regulation, and it makes it much more difficult.
We're counting on you, on Maureen, going forward to make these conditions so tight they're waterproof.
So that's a little bit what we're.
It sounds like that's not necessary now. It's well, but anyway, I mean, it's very good that we've got a way of handling it. It just makes it, as you say,
and
a
it's
little
one of
more
those things that's
cumbersome.
it's nice too, where as much as I hate to say it, is I like when projects like that have issues where they come back in to permit significant repairs or replacements, because then you get a chance to kind of re-update and redo those things.
Oh, yeah.
But it doesn't always happen. So
Yeah, because I mean that was it's you know, the 3-year limit. I mean, there's all kinds. Obviously, there's lots of things in terms of projects that have been permitted, you know, years and years ago, and then something new comes up and what have you. So this is, you know, this is very helpful to me from a learning point of view.
yeah, it can be tricky to deal with, but I think you kind of take it case by case and figure out how best to get it to comply, and then try to get the current standards addressed as best as you can within the legal confines of that permit. It gets even worse when they're even older and there really weren't even additional conditions attached. You just get like an order for the project and then you're off and rolling. Some of those are the whole.
We've learned a lot.
Yeah. It's just not this commission. I mean, DEP as a whole, like the process has improved 1,000 times over since the 80s and 90s and 2000s. So, and you know, they'll say the same thing probably 20 years from now when Ernie's still on the board. It was better back in the day. So
Ernie sees the light at the tunnel.
maybe Ashley or Seth will still be on that. The old stalwarts. I will mercifully be retired by then.
I hope I'm alive for 20 years.
Well, thanks for that, Jeff. All right, so moving on to committee appointments. Yeah, right. So CRAC, that's the Coastal Resilience
Resiliency
Advisory Council
So I think
Committee.
both Dave and I are interested in being on that.
Okay.
Well, I would say if people want, they can say they're interested in. You can handle this anyway. You can do it by voice vote.
Outside.
If that's what you guys want to roll, you can.
You go out that door.
Maybe just
Not at my first meeting.
maybe if you're interested, just quickly say why, and then we can
Yeah.
vote on what we feel here.
Oh, okay.
So, do we want to go one by one or list them all and who's interested?
Well, let's just do, I suppose, however you want to do it. You can do it one at a time.
Okay.
Well, I'm interested because I've been doing an awful lot of research on it over the years, both for this committee and also, you know, I grew up watching the Atlantic in action firsthand. So there's a lot of reasons why I would like to play a part in preparing the town to deal with sea level rise going forward. So
I also have a great interest in coastal areas, having worked most of my lifetime within some sort of marine construction projects, anything related to coastal protection. And I see that this is going to be a serious issue going forward, as we all know, with rising sea level and so forth. That's my standpoint.
I want to flip a
Anybody have a
coin.
coin? Yeah.
Anyone else?
Yeah, is anybody else interested?
Do you want to list off for all of them first, and then you can go back and vote
Okay.
because there's overlap. So CPC. Would
So
be
CPC, who's interested?
I'll do CPC.
Good man.
Okay, so we have
All right,
Joe.
I'll hand over the golden key.
Thank you.
It's CPC, so it's legitimately.
Can you get it over your neck?
Yeah. the state financed it, so it's.
Anyone else? Unopposed. Look at that.
You're
That
a
is-
lock.
There we go.
Yes.
Unanimous.
Lucky winner.
Unanimous appointment.
Good luck on the next one.
All right, NP and EDC.
I'm interested in that for having first been involved with it just earlier this year with the hazard mitigation plan and kind of seeing how important it is to get these things, you know, properly out there and useful and everything else. So and frankly, the CRAC committee as well is going to be setting policy and doing things like that. So I think it's likely they'll be working together. So I just, it's the fact that this is a broader kind of committee really interested me. So that's why I would like to be our representative on that committee.
Anybody else?
Apparently Joe and Maureen are
Good job,
intimidating
Maureen.
ones on the.
Hey.
Well, 2 are taken care of. Mosquito control committee, I mean,
I'm
we
not
haven't
sure how
really
mu-
been meeting. I don't.
What? I think if that fires back up, we'll take up the appointment at that point.
I think that's probably smart.
I don't want to see it seem like that
We
committee
haven't
is
met
as dead as the
forever.
mosquitoes that get treated, but they are.
I would have thought you guys would have
Right.
been hot and heavy, just coming into the wet spring.
There was some like state policy changes and things, so we aren't really an effective
Yeah,
committee
there's
anymore.
there's a whole like state mosquito control
Yeah.
plan, and there's mosquito control districts now as part of that plan, and they kind of drive policy on that. And I think that stopped the need for that committee to some degree because that's what this committee was kind of doing. So
Yeah.
it just kind of lingers around. It's another one of the committees that, you know, pads the number for the town to like 58 committees, but they could probably remove it. So there's a lot of committees in the town.
All right.
I'm waiting for the committee on committees
Oh, jeez.
to discuss the effectiveness of
The
committees.
head
through-
Just
committee on
wait.
committees.
That would be interesting.
There's no other. Right?
No, there are no others right now.
Okay, so I guess it's just crack with Dave and Ian.
Would you guys prefer to do like secret ballot, or you guys just want to go for hand votes?
No.
Why don't we
Make
just
it
toss a
easy.
coin?
Let's toss
We can
a
toss a
coin.
coin.
Just toss a
I
coin,
like
yeah,
to
toss
have
a
a
coin.
Yeah.
Or so
Absolutely.
in all fairness too, remember committee appointments are typically for 1 year, or typically from July 1st to July 1st. So if there is a change of heart after the year or even partway through it, there's always the ability to
Anybody have
shift.
a two-headed meeting?
Except for CPC. CPC is a 10-year appointment.
forgot to bring it in.
Oh, I bet there's an app to flip a coin.
I'm sure there is.
Random number
Rock,
generator.
paper, scissors, but
Somebody must have a coin.
Does anybody? I don't have it.
Here we go. You'll be 1 and you'll be 2. We'll do
Okay.
a random number generator.
Okay.
Oh my God! See, I knew. I
You
knew.
have a random number.
And which am I
Oh,
again?
that's fine.
Sciencey guy. Of course he
I'll,
is.
Totally amaze me every time I see
All
it.
right. Here we go.
What am I now?
1 and 2. Random.org.
Pseudo-random.org. More precise.
I want to see the algorithm.
It was 2. You guys can
Was it? Okay.
verify that if
All
you
right.
like.
yeah, it does say 2.
Does say
No, no.
two.
Fair enough.
Okay, well,
All right, so that was Dave.
a hard choice
That was
there.
Dave.
So that's Dave. Dave.
Yeah.
Dave, yeah.
Yeah.
Again, this is like the easiest sport ever. We don't actually even vote. We just
Should we make that a 1-year appointment?
I think
Well, they're all
I think
1 year
it
appointments
is.
because there is potential in that 1 year as well that the board could turn over members. So usually the first meeting in July, we get the fun of
we could do a shared
officer
thing.
appointments, and
Shared positions.
that is unfortunately it doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
Yeah.
So
At least we're all still friends. I mean,
Yeah.
Well,
I know. I was kind of actually hoping for the outside. I was waiting to see how this is going to go down. It's going to be like the nicest fight of all time.
Rolling around outside.
I'm sorry, I'm doing this.
Right at the stage.
Jeff, wait a minute, let me get my video set.
All right, so looks like we're appointed.
Yep. So I'll just run through really quick. So the crack committee is going to be Mr. LaFleur, CPC is Mr. Topham, and then Maureen has stepped into NP and EDC. Ms. Phillips.
All right, commissioner
Well,
comments?
Thank you all for volunteering.
agreed.
Commissioner Cummings, well, so happy to have you guys.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I
Thank you.
Welcome
certainly,
aboard.
seriously miss our former members, but I very, very glad that these were the
They're watching Spy on
replacements.
TV.
Pardon me?
They're at home sitting.
Yeah.
Well, they know how I feel about it.
Andy stopped by today to drop off his iPad. He threatened to come, and I said, Andy, if you come, I will throw you out.
Thank you all. I'm excited to work with you all and serve on the commission. So
Good deal.
I appreciate your assistance.
No, me too. It's going to be a good learning experience, and it's already just the obviously the history you all have with these various applications and things. I don't know what to look for yet really. So this is great. Really looking forward to it. But I won't be here in 2 weeks as I have to be in California for a family reunion and memorial service.
Oh,
So
Good for the reunion, sorry for the reunion.
yeah. Well, it's good. It's good altogether.
And I won't be here either.
How about reading English? Do you know how to read?
No, I know. I know about that.
We spoke about both remote participation and
Right.
reading it.
Right. So I can
Any
do
staff
that.
reports, Jeff?
I do have really quickly,
Yeah, we'll pack them all up.
as Dave is packing up all of my nameplates, because he's nice like that. This is also the time of year too, and I know it's a little slower, and some of the people who just sat through a year and a half of arduous filings. If there are any other things the commission that aren't typically application driven want to cover, be thinking about those and feel free to send those in to me if people have questions about, maybe rules that they'd like to see reviewed, or educational opportunities to the board, or any kind of information that you guys would be looking for or find to be helpful, or something you'd like to add to an agenda. Please let myself know. Now that Ashley is chair as well, we kind of set the agenda by application, but for any of those things, we'll just verify through the chair that we want to put it on and which agenda we're on. Everyone's good with it. So if you have those things, please send them to me. And as a reminder, if you have other information, send it to me and I will put it through the group. So it's not commissioner to commissioner communication. It's commissioner to staff to commissioners communication, which is kind of the same thing, but the state likes it better when it comes from me and not from you guys directly. So, but if there are things people had interest, or I know you guys are new and fresh ideas are always welcome for things that you've seen or ways you think things could be more efficient or better. We definitely, feedback and constructive progress is always good. That's it for me. Everyone have a happy holiday. Enjoy the 4th, and for those of us who have to go back to work on the 5th, enjoy your 1 day of work and then back to the weekend.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. All of the meetings are this
All in
fast,
favor?
by the way.
Heck.
Oh yeah.